Hello everyone and welcome to Donkerweb chapters 11 through 20. If you have not watched the previous video, I suggest you do so for chapters 1 through 10. Just another disclaimer, all rights reserved to Fani for Yun and people depicted. So yeah, let's get to it. So Greg is unable to sleep because of this mysterious burnt book that was labeled Valkyrie, and he does a little bit of googling and finds that it's linked to Norse mythology and it refers to female entities who decide to give up their lives for in battle or whatever, and he associates these entities with the Baker's crimes. In his daily life, Greg is just exhausted. He's had enough, and his classmate Dane, remember from earlier, he gives him some Ritalin, but Greg however doesn't take it. Anyways, he sees this biker or whatever observing him, and he starts to feel paranoid, and this leads Greg to packing a bag for a weekend because he's going back to Jersey. He heads back, gets in an Uber and arrives late at night, and he sees the porch light is on, and so is his mom's room, and he sees Andre, who is Greg's mom's little side piece, which go Greg's mom, eat that up, you know what I mean? And she reveals to Greg that, you know what, you can't judge me, there's more secrets in this family than you'll ever know, so moving on. Anyways, Greg goes to visit his father at the Kagosi Mapuru second prison. Greg also brings hamburgers to visit his daddykins in prison. Once inside, he sees his father, and he sees his father is very physically diminished, and he sees that his once manicured hands are now very dirty. The conversation is very guarded, and the father actually eventually lashes out at Greg for tarnishing the family name and suggesting it was Greg's fault for the reason he got imprisoned, but I don't remember Greg doing Project Nursery Rhyme, but that's besides the point. Anyways, he apologizes after this whole outburst, and they just sit in silence until Greg admits that he wants to assist in finding the baker. However, his father's very no, don't do that, and despite the warning, Greg is no, I'm going to, and his father is just you know what, do your own thing, don't do it, but I can't do anything about it. Business hours end, and as Greg has to leave now, and he's got no answers on the baker or Valkyrie, and before his farmer leaves, there's this glimmer of fear in his eyes, and then Greg sees an emaciated Doc Pinard, who was the headmaster at the time of Lawson College, and he sees him through the visitor's glass. Anyways, Greg leaves the prison, now more determined than ever to find the baker, and as it is already damaging his relationship with his father and contributes to his feelings of guilt for arresting his father, basically. Greg returns home and he sees a red car parked outside, and he's oh, okay, hi, what's happening? And after seeing the vehicle for a while, he recognizes the woman inside. It's my girl, well, my ex-girl, Nicole. And is that a baby? Yeah, so she just had a baby, not his, thankfully.
Are not
little girl named Colette. You can see that she's struggling with motherhood, and because she's a single mother, as she admits that it was a result of a one-night stand and the baby daddy's nowhere to be found. Cole came in hopes that they could rekindle their relationship, but Greg's yeah, no, not happening, babes. I'm no one's stepdaddy kind of thing. And Greg ain't no stepdaddy. Relationship will live on in the past. Greg goes back to his bachelor pad back in Stellies, and sorry, is that blood on my walls? So he realizes his home has been intruded, most likely by the baker, and that he's now a target. And driven by necessity, he's hold on, what if I ask Xander for help? He's wondering if he can even trust Xander, because obviously, Xander wasn't too great in terms of, busting Greg's father into prison, but whatever. Greggy is now at a party at the Lawson's house, hosted by Thomas Lawson, who has connections to Greg's father. Greg isn't having too much fun, it's not that big of a jolt, and he meets with Sebastian Stadler, this elderly man who Greg kind of just vents to. He's oh yeah, my dad's in jail, whatever, da-da-da-da. Greg needs to stop oversharing, it's actually getting enough now, but besides the point. This conversation interrupted by Thomas Lawson, and he kind of pulls Greg aside and kind of gives this very belittling and demeaning conversation. Not great. And Greg doesn't have the best of times. He says toodaloo to Sebastian Stadler, and he's back off. And one thing to note is that Stadler does give him some advice on perceiving the good and evil in people. Greg also discovers that his dad might have been responsible for John's death because the pills that John took were from Plus Ultramed, and sorry, what's Plus Ultramed again? Oh right, the front for Project Nursery Rhyme. His mother's no, that's not the case, my lovey. Trust you, your father's not that shady. But Greg's determined to unmask the truth. Later, on a Friday night, he decides to visit Xander's hacking website to see if he can get in contact with Xander, because Xander's been MIA. So he goes to www.echoes_underworld.co.za. Anyways, through his research, he finds like this very unsettling like blog post, assuming that, you know, Xander's been found out, in the sense that like his page has been compromised. So Greg decides to send a little blog post like, hey babes, please help me, need your help. Next morning he wakes up and he sees that Xander has replied with this like very cryptic response, and the message is in Greek. Like, oh, that's just perfect for Greggy, because obviously he's got lots of experience in Greek. No, he does not, but anyway, it turns out to be a palindrome, and the palindrome reads, wash the sins, not just the face. Greg obviously realizes, oh, he wants a confession. He wants a confession. So then he gets very angry, because it's like, what did Greg do wrong? Like, he is not his father. He decides to call up Plank to go for some brunch, hoping this will help clear his mind at De Wardenmarkt. And also Lisa's there, which is to Greg's surprise, but he welcomes it. And they actually have a very nice time as Lisa and Greg both kind of pick on Plank for his like little quirks, which is a really just fun little moment for all of them, and they all get along really well. Greg goes home afterwards, he's had a fun time, and he decides to reply to Xander, giving him what he's looking for, admitting his guilt for living off the undeserved wealth that he has, expressing the despair about suicide, the mother's secret relationship, and this image of a spoiled brat. Ultimately also just apologizing for like his dad, like killing Xander's dad, but like whatever. You know, Greg hopes this will ultimately satisfy Xander, and that he will finally get the help that he desperately needs. We have an unexpected meeting with Xander's old partner, Tom, at the NG Moederkerk, and he's wearing this like anonymous t-shirt, and he reveals that, yo, actually Xander sent me. Sorry babes, he wants nothing to do with you. And Greg's like, oh no, but like I can give money. And Tom's like, no, sorry babes, not happening. And despite these desperate pleas, Tom's just like denying these offers, and you know, Greg is now just left with even more problems than he had at the beginning. Distracted himself now from Xander's ultimate rejection, he just feels defeated, and he looks back at this burnt book. He just looks at all the fragments that are inside, the things that are legible. He sees a name, Brody, and he sees fragments like Canther D3 or D8, Azid, and Oxen, which he makes like a mental note of. His investigation is however interrupted by the surprise arrival of Plank and Lisa, and Chloe, who also just makes herself very much known. She also does express how she's very interested in Greg's hacking, and she wants to know if he will be able to help her with a potential art project. And then Lisa points out to Greg, you like promised my daddy that you would not like hack. And then Greg's like, well, funny you should mention that. I've actually been looking at the baker and like doing my own little hacking thing. So like, yes, I promised your dad, but I'm going to break that promise because this is more important than a promise I made to your dad, whatever. And also just, you know, still not clean on Greggy's pan. Plank will never fully be supportive of this. The gathering ends, everyone leaves, and Greg decides to go try and study, and he falls asleep on his textbook. The next day, he's walking to his classes, and he's at the bridge, and there's this huge crowd, and he's walking through the crowd, and to his ultimate shock, he sees some familiar face lying dead in the river, wearing an anonymous t-shirt. And who was wearing an anonymous t-shirt? Tom. So Tom is very much dead in the river, and this ultimately comes as a shock to Greg, and Greg does take a video of this. He captures the video and he goes to class, and he arrives a bit late, and Professor Carby's like, hey Greggles, you're a bit late, my love, so I'm gonna just embarrass you for 2 seconds. Ask him a question that obviously Greg doesn't know the answer to, and Greg makes a bit of embarrassment about himself. All his peers find very funny, but Professor Carby's very much unsatisfied. Greg begins to debate like if Tom's death had anything to do with the baker. During this wondering, he's messaging Plank about it as well, and sends him the video. After this class, Greg receives a Dropbox link, and this kind of gives him a little bit of a freak, because it's like, oh, this is so random, maybe it's Xander. No, it's actually pictures of your mom. Your mom! Shopping. He's very worried for his mother's safety. He tells his mom like, yo, so mom, there's like people taking photos of you and like you're potentially in danger. So she's like, what? So she ups her security and she's not leaving the house now without Andre. And this also, Greg now just feels this burden, because it's like, oh right, Andre, you're still married to my dad though, like, that's kind of weird. So now he just feels this burden, because it's like all these family secrets, it's just like enough now, you know, and he still now cannot tell his father. about Andre. Greg just starts occupying himself with other things, and he's doing rugby, he's doing his studies, and he like attempts at socializing. Greg is like walking back and he sees this man dressed in a hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, standing like motionlessly and just like kind of looking at Greg. And Greg's like, Xander? Xander, babes? Like, oh my gosh. And then this man just like turns and runs away. And like Greg obviously follows him, and they run through like incoming cars and through the botanical garden, crossing footbridges, and even scaling over fences. And Xander still somehow remains ahead, and Xander just disappears, and Greg has no idea where he's gone. Greg sees out the hop of Plank and lives at Wilgenhof, and he goes there to tell him about this. Oh, like I might have just bumped into Xander, babes. Like that's kind of crazy. Greg goes back to his house, and you know, he's like struggling to concentrate, and he's like, oh, you know what, I'm taking the Ritalin, babes. It's time, you know? He decides to deal with the side effects of it: anxiety, fast heart rate, irritability, mood swings. Besides the point. In the midst of studying late in the night, he receives an anonymous message to meet him the next morning. So after a very short rest of sleep, Greg heads to the meeting spot, which was an information center, and here he overhears a heated argument between a woman named Brunhilda and a prisoner called Julian. As Greg is waiting for this messenger person to come, this like prisoner is shouting at him like from inside about the baker and like threatening him and his father's safety, like blah 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 blah. And then Greg is ultimately left like a little bit unsettled, and like he's a little bit worried, like, oh, that's, why are you threatening me? Like, huh? That's chapters 11 through 20. If you want the next part, just go look for it yourself. Don't be lazy. KK, toodaloo.